Hello, I'm David Breeden. I'm the Senior Minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, and this is Coffee and Wisdom. When we look at the religious and philosophical scene, especially American culture, to see where religion has been and where it may be going. This week, we've been talking about the spiritual but not religious. Also, we will be considering the nuns, N-O-N-E-S's, and what that means to the ongoing religious conversation in the United States. So I'm calling it the attack of the SBNRs. Who are they and what do they want? It's not maybe quite so frightening as the War of the Worlds or the Martians attacking, but it definitely is having an effect on the religion in the United States. One of the things that we are watching here, and this is 1998 to 2014, the most recent one that I could get, which is the number of people who are responding as spiritual but not religious, or neither spiritual nor religious. Now, notice that there are greater numbers nowadays that are neither spiritual nor religious. We'll be talking about them tomorrow. But today we're looking at this graph, which is taking people out of mainline Christianity especially, and that is the spiritual but not religious. So the tradition has been responding to this ongoing thing. It has become especially apparent demographically in the 2000s. For example, this is a little slide from the Catholic Mama, who says the dangers of being spiritual but not religious. And the Catholic Mama says one is convenience-based morality. Now, we've talked about this quite a bit over the months. What does it mean when religion becomes a commodity that can be bought and sold and you can choose? And Catholic Mama is worried about that as well. Ultimate commitment is the self. We notice that in an invented religion, a subjective one called Sheilaism, in the famous book by Robert Bellah. And yes, that is an aspect of what is going on. And then Catholic Mama also argues unsustainable morality cross-generation. That's a more difficult thing to prove, I think, but the idea, of course, is that your family religious values are not being communicated across generations. So your kids may or may not love and hate the same things that you taught them to. In other words, they may get outside of that tradition. Well, then there's the anti-tradition from the Divinity School address of Ralph Waldo Emerson, Harvard Divinity School of 1838. This is a very famous and pivotal moment in Unitarianism. One of the things that we have to look at, and we have been considering this a lot over the time and in Coffee and Wisdom as we do look at the various traditions, especially traditions that go into what's known as perennial philosophy. That is, that all religions have sort of the same thing going on. And what we have to look at there, and Emerson and Thoreau, of course, are the very pivotal figures in this. And over the months, we've seen them come up over and over again as inspirations. But what does it mean to have a tradition of anti-tradition? But first, let's listen to a little bit from this 1838 Harvard Divinity School address. Emerson said, "I once heard a preacher who sorely tempted me to say I would go to church no more. Men go, thought I, where they are wont to go, else had no soul entered the temple in the afternoon." In other words, we're just going to church because it's a habit at this point. A snowstorm was falling around us. The snowstorm was real, the preacher merely spectral, and the eye felt the sad contrast in looking at him and then out the window behind him into the beautiful meteor of the snow. This is a plaque on the wall in the chapel where Ralph Waldo Emerson did give the Divinity School address. The famous line from it is, acquaint thyself at first hand with deity, which is, of course, an absolutely essential element of what is known as transcendentalism. So there you have it. Also, we have to note that Ralph Waldo Emerson was not invited back to give any more speeches at Harvard until he was an extremely old man when these battles had long ago died away. But here you see, we're talking about he's in a church. There's this spectral preacher speaking, blah, 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 blah. And he looks out and look at that snow going on outside. So he had lived, this is the preacher that Emerson is talking about, he had lived in vain. He had not one word intimating that he had laughed or wept, was married or in love, had been commended or cheated or chagrined. If he had ever lived and acted, we were none the wiser for it. The capital secret of his profession, namely to convert life into truth, he had not learned. Not one fact in all of his experience had he yet imported into his doctrine. This man had plowed and planted and talked and bought and sold. He had read books. He had eaten and drunken. His head aches. His heart throbs. He smiles and suffers. Yet was there not a surmise, a hint in all the discourse that he had ever lived at all. So speaking about dead religion, this is the essence of what Mr. Emerson was saying to these young ministers. One of the ministers in that audience, the graduating group, was Theodore Parker, who would later become a firebrand as an abolitionist and also a pivotal figure in transcendentalism in the United States. So this had quite an effect. And as I said, Emerson was not invited back for several decades after he said this. This is the essence of transcendentalism, that we must live within the crucible of life itself. That's what's important, not these hidebound old books of theology. All right. So there you go. The essence of transcendentalism right there. But listen to the Pope, Pope Francis. It is not necessary to believe in God to be a good person. In a way, the traditional notion of God is outdated. One can be spiritual, but not religious. It is not necessary to go to church. For many, nature can be a church. Ding, ding. See, Emerson has even gotten to the Vatican. Some of the best people in history did not believe in God, while some of the worst deeds were done in his name. Now, this is the kind of thing that Pope Francis often walks back later when he says it, because it is his liberalism sneaking into the conversation. And then some cardinals whisper into his ear that he probably shouldn't have said that. It's not real good for collections on Sunday morning Mass for the Pope to be saying this. But it is recognizing a strain of religious tradition coming right out of transcendentalism, coming right out of Unitarianism, that is going into the wider world, even to the point of a pope having heard of it. It's a tradition of anti-tradition. So there you have it. But wait a minute. This is a little slide I found online. No book without an author, no morality without God. So one of the things that has really happened is the split between the liberal religionists, who really pretty much think what the Pope just said and what Emerson thought long, long ago, and this other side of religion that says absolutely not. Catholic Mama says, no, you cannot have a tradition of no tradition. You must have these traditional values, and they must be communicated as capital T truth over time. And this is one of the great arguments that's going on in our own time with the spiritual but not religious. But wait, I have to say, by religion, do SBNRs mean a tradition with structures and institutions? Is that what it means? Emerson could attack organized Unitarianism because there was an organized Unitarianism to attack. There have to be traditions in order for there to be anti-traditions, right? What happens when the structures and traditions are gone? And of course, as we talked about yesterday, nowadays, roughly 25% of Americans say it's just fine that religion stuff has gone away. It is damaging anyway. We're done with it. So religions are harmful and they need to disappear. So those are the battle lines that are now going on with the spiritual but not religious. I've mentioned this before. This has gone on for a good long time. This is Ludwig Feuerbach from the 19th century talking about the essence of Christianity, written in German, translated into English by the great Unitarian writer George Eliot, who was a religious liberal in her own time. And the essence of the book, the essence of Christianity, according to those two, is that it is a religion of Jesus and the morality that is exposed in the Gospels, not a religion about Jesus. And you will hear that over and over again from the spiritual but not religious. It's an age-old tradition at this point. It's been going on for 150 years, but it keeps bubbling up into our culture. And the question is, of course, then there were nuns who haven't heard any of this. Spiritual but not religious necessarily have a basis in some sort of traditional religion that they are then reacting against and taking parts of what they consider to be the essence of Buddhism, Christianity, whatever. But the nuns, they probably haven't heard about any of this and have never been into the tradition of anti-tradition or anything else. There's no tradition to react against. And those are the people we need to start looking at tomorrow. Thanks for joining in. Bibles and Beer on Wednesday evening, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. Join in this week, Philemon from the New Revised Standard Version. Philemon is a famous book, Justifying Slavery, or does it? And that is one of the questions that we will be asking this week. Thanks for tuning in, and you can certainly subscribe to our two YouTube channels, First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, and also the Den of Conversation. We have a presence on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you can help us out on PayPal or at firstunitarian.org/donate. Thanks a lot, and I'll be back with the nuns tomorrow.